Right.
Right.
All right. Well, I'm Nate Ruch, and today is a reverse episode. And I'm guest hosting the Young Adults Today podcast, where the guest interviews the host.
That's right.
A little bit about me. Now, my name is Nate Ruch. I'm a lead pastor of Emmanuel Christian Center in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. I'm a former vice president at NCU, which is where I came across Josiah back in the day, and then Micah. At some point along the way, we became part mentors, friends, and I've been a big fan of what's happening with young adults today. So I'm one of those people that you've interviewed before for a podcast. Now I get to ask you some questions, and I think our listeners are going to love it too.
Here we go.
They're going to really love it. Would you be willing to take a few moments to share the mission and the vision of young adults today? Because I hear there's some really exciting news just around the corner. As of June 1st, 2023, Young Adults Today is a nonprofit ministry that turns 1 year old. So there's got to be a mission behind this big revelation.
That's right. So we have a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, children, and then a 1-year-old ministry nonprofit baby. So we have a 1, 2, and 3-year-old. That's what you'll say. Josiah.
What's next year?
Oh gosh, 1 year at a time.
One day at a time.
Yeah.
Seriously, too. Thanks for doing this. This was your idea,
Mm.
and we're just taking you up on the opportunity, recording live from your church, Emmanuel Christian Center. We love this place. And yeah, I mean, the vision and mission of young adults today, like mission, why do we exist? Psalm 145, verse 4 talks about one generation is to tell the next of the mighty acts of God.
Mm.
That's it right there in a nutshell, is in scripture. And we just love that verse. That's been an anthem for us of I'm a millennial. Our daughters are the alpha generation, primarily ministering to young adults and Gen Z, but they need to know the goodness of God in the land of the living. And that's just really our prayer. And so the vision is reaching young adults for Christ and equipping leaders and churches to do the same.
Yeah. Good.
So you guys have that as a mission, and you've done a lot already. What's the strategy to build that vision? What do you feel like God's put together in your heart?
Yeah. Well, we realized a couple of things along the journey, just doing ministry as a church, as the Chi Alpha College campus, and not only from us and our heart and burden, but the burden and the hearts of other leaders. And essentially what they were saying is we don't have relationships, we don't have rallying points, and we don't have resources. And we need to reach the next generation. So they felt under-resourced in all those different areas. So they came to us, multiple people throughout the state and across the nation saying like, hey, what are you guys doing? And we're like, what are we doing? And so we felt that pressed on our heart. And that's where the burden, I think, elements of it began for young adults today, was simply the need of others. So our strategy and approach in that is equipping the people who are leading the young adults themselves through resources, rallying points, and relationships, and providing those opportunities through events, through gatherings, through coaching communities, just however we can put hands and feet to what they're doing and just equip them along the way. And then the other side is the 18 to 30-year-old themselves, the person who's trying to figure out, navigate, I'm not living with mom and dad anymore, I'm on a college campus, who am I going to marry, how do I spend my money, how do I save money, like all those different adulting questions that the 18 to 30-year-old has, and just coming alongside them and essentially do the same thing for them with resources, rallying points, relationships, setting the table and inviting people in and along the journey. So
wow.
And our approach.
And I've been privy to some of the stories and some of the incredible expansion, places you didn't anticipate that God would take you, to meet leaders around the country that are making a significant difference, and to hear the stories of young adults that Jesus is getting a hold of, and they're becoming aware of things they didn't know existed. What are some of the miracle stories, maybe in the last year, that you guys can share that was just powerful?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, first of all, I can't believe it's a year. That's how fast time goes. It was about a year ago we drove up here and sat in this office and we were praying through this.
And I went to the board.
Yes.
We started writing it out, right?
Yep.
And I just think of like the first one that comes to my heart, and because it's reaching young adults for Christ, would be leaders to do the same. We've seen 54 responses to the gospel since May, since launching. And for us, that's what it's all about. Each of those young adults would be people who have also then gotten connected to a local church, plugged in maybe to a Chi Alpha or a campus ministry. in the process. And I think of just a few weeks ago, we were at our leader conference here in Minneapolis and saw between 40 and 60 churches represented, either starting a young adult ministry or wanting to strengthen one. And you talk about hungry young leaders who want to reach their generation and the ones to come. I just think that's a miracle. I think we haven't asked to go anywhere. We haven't asked to do anything.
That's a miracle in itself.
Right. And to see some of the doors that God's opened, I think of something you told us, don't chase opportunities, but chase the voice. And that's just been a filter for us and a heart check for us. But what else would you say? Miracles?
Oh, there's so many miracles. Like even seeing people get like physically free of addictions, forgiving their parents from certain upbringings. So we saw that even last May of 2022 at our, retreat at the weekend, and they were at the altars weeping because they were forgiving their parents, forgiving the decisions like their families had made before them, and they wanted to see a change. I mean, one gal was up there and she was a secret alcoholic, married for less than 2 or 3 years, secret drinking. And she's like, this is the first time I've never had the desire to drink in that long of time.
Wow.
So to see that, or to be invited into our friends in Missouri, they said, hey, come down for the weekend. We'd love for you guys to teach, preach with our camp and be there with our young adults, and to see them be baptized in the Holy Spirit, to see gifts and skill sets come alive in and through like talents and treasures that people have, but also see and come alongside them like, no, like God has so much more for you, than don't just settle along the way. So I think that's just the tip of the iceberg of what we're seeing. This is what we're hearing. I mean, we don't even get to see everything that God's doing behind the scenes. When you go to the chiropractor and he says, hey, I have a client who's went to the weekend and met her best friend and now they talk every day.
Wow.
Like I didn't even tell, he's like, what'd you do this weekend? I was like, oh, I was at the weekend with young adults. Like, you're the one leading that? I have a client. So when people in the community around that are 10, 15, 20 miles away from even just where we live, they're hearing of other people's God stories, and it comes back to us in that small form. It's like, thank you, Lord. Like people are. And when people go to the weekend, we have 2 friends that met potential spouses. One's engaged and one's seriously dating. So I'm not saying that we're matchmaking, but it's like
no promises
they
here.
met good godly community, friendships, or help partners. Maybe you're going to go to a college campus and you need a roommate. Who knows? You never know who your next best friend could be. So just some of those small things maybe to us, but huge for the people it's ultimately impacting. So
it strikes me that in a day and age in which a lot of bad news travels so much faster than good news, that even amongst the generation of young adults, there's a lot of bad news that, like, even in the church world, we get like the highlights and bad things that are happening, love and the definitions of love and truth and all of that. But right in the middle of that, God's kingdom is being established in that next generation. For those that keep their eyes open,
that's right.
There's good things happening. And when I think about all of those things, it requires leaders that feel the burden from God. They hear from God and they simply say yes. You guys have said yes, but you're talking to on a regular basis on this podcast the people who are also saying yes.
Love it.
And they don't hear or see the full impact of what they're doing. And when I think of the burden that's on your heart, where did that burden come from, Josiah? Talk about that vision a little bit more. What kind of keeps you moving?
Yeah, I think 2012 was a crazy year in my life spiritually. And I had already given my life to Christ. I was a young adult and I already had sensed like a general call to ministry, but a series of events happened. The first is I visited a friend at UND, Grand Forks, North Dakota, and he was doing a hip hop show. We're driving back to his dorm, spent the night at his dorm, and it was there like my heart broke on the college campus because I saw one young gal giving another gal a big back ride, dead of winter, negative temperatures. North Dakota's flat and you get it, and she doesn't have any clothes on, and that just broke my heart for what's happening on a college campus. And I long for there to be a different narrative. I just think of people who are looking for hope. They're looking for the next anything or feeling and purpose. And so that happened. I was about to go into my senior year at North Central. One night or afternoon, I just like opened my Bible to Ecclesiastes in my parents' living room. And you read about meaningless life or the meaning of life. And I was like, God, I want a life meaning. Do whatever you want me to do. But would you give me something to live for that's worth dying for? And I saw like in that moment a black and white vision. I haven't had one before. I don't think I've had one since. But it was just 10,000 young adults on their knees, lifting their hands in worship, surrendering their lives to Christ. And I haven't seen that yet fulfilled in like completely, but I've seen partial fulfillments along the way. And but I remember then we had a mentoring relationship when I was in college, and show up in like June of 2012. You're like, you're setting the agenda.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I didn't prep for this meeting. but forgive me, I'll be prepared next time. But this is what God's done. And I just remember sharing that vision. You were one of the first people. You're like, I hope you've written it down.
Yeah.
And that's really what got me moving out of the business world into ministry, but then starting the young adult small group. And just, I think that burden and that vision, my heart gets stirred for that. Like it keeps me up late at night dreaming about like, how can we do something? And it gets me out of bed like, man, this is something to chase.
So that, you know, I love the question of the birthplace of where something comes from. I've often said that vision requires a burden for a vision to be birthed. Because burden is the birthplace of vision. And if you think about anyone that's listening right now or watching, everybody's bothered by certain things. You can be bothered by anything. You can be bothered by your parents. You can be bothered by government. You can be bothered by the economy. You can bother yourself when you look in the mirror.
That's right.
But if you, instead of seeing that as a negative, and you begin to say, why am I bothered? God, why does this bother me? This isn't right. This is an injustice. This shouldn't be this way. Right in that space, if you give yourself an openness to the Holy Spirit, then God will give you vision for how to see that turn. And so instead of it being something that bothers you, it becomes something that burdens you, and that vision compels you to run into something. And you discover those things at different stages. And like recently, you talked about an event where you were speaking. And the subject matter that you talked about was so compelling to the audience. The girls were coming up, young women were coming up and were talking to you. What was that about, and what was the subject of what you talked about?
Well, I think one thing that's not going away is young adults is number one, but with that comes relationships. And many young adults, they desire to be married, desire to be loved, they desire to understand and be understood by somebody aside from Christ himself. So we're just basically breaking down the importance of relationships, like worth the wait. Why are things worth the wait and worth, you know, surrendering to God? So we talked about singleness, dating, waiting, and engagement. And marriage, like what are those components and how do we break that down? And so I shared parts of my testimony, but when you're in a room with 100 young adults and like 20 young girls stay afterwards for like an hour and a half, and
which is anytime she talks about that, there is
and when half the room is half guys, half girls, and they're nodding along, and there's hands all over the end, like
so it's not just the girls.
You could sit there for hours. And there was another time, probably 2-3 years ago, pre-COVID, I think it was a year before COVID, that we had a breakout session. Over 500 young adults came to the breakout session to talk about relationships. And I stood there for 3 hours talking after we had already talked for an hour. And for the very last girl to sit there and just be like, I just have to say thank you. I'm like, you sat here for 3 hours just to say thank you.
Wow.
Like, to me, I'm like, I'll be here all weekend. Just track me down and say thank you. But for whatever was like pressed upon her heart, she just needed to sit there and wait. And I'm like, oh my word. So I mean, when we're talking about relationships, we're talking about intimacy with God and intimacy with others. Like, what does that look like? And don't cheaply give yourself away, and don't be led astray in that process. So
there's a real hunger for how to do
100%.
relationships.
for sure.
You feel like young adults are not equipped, like they just don't know, or what is it?
They're tremendously self-aware. Like I'm not that self-aware where I would be like, hey, this is all my problems. But I think they're so fluent in information, like drowning even, but then to sift out what is wisdom, what is truth, like kind of the life hacks, adulting, hard life coaching. I mean, young adults are absolutely hungry for methods of life. What does it mean to be a 20-something who follows Christ in 2023? I think that's just.
And why would they listen to you, Micah?
Oh,
I mean, what is it? What is it? What's the draw? I mean, honestly, what do you think it is?
I feel like God's burdened my heart for this component. I think just out of my own life. I mean, being 25, getting out of a 7-year relationship that I had not prayed for, was not choosing not to walk with the Lord, and just needed to surrender that. And I did not have a mentor in my life. I did not have a female in my life call me out and up in my garbage and say, like, Micah, you know, X, Y, and Z, like, why are you here? Why are you doing this? And I didn't have anybody. So I feel like there was a very pivotal moment of my life where God's like, you can allow your story to become a testimony and further my kingdom and give me the honor and glory, let me to heal, and you be the person that you wish you had for others. Same like friendships. I think so many people wish they had a friend until they realize, like, wow, maybe I should start being the friend that I wish I had to others, and maybe they'll reciprocate.
Yeah.
So I think there was either that, or I could have totally been tainted and jaded and not walked with the Lord and not walked through that healing, and chosen to allow the enemy to hold me by the throat of just like, you don't have a story, you don't have a testimony, you don't have the ability. So I felt like God just made it very clear of like, it's either this way or that way. It's either the sin equals your death, or you're going to choose me and like, let me glorify myself through your story that you chose to walk in. So I think just a favor with people and saying like, you're
But
not
your
alone,
story
right?
is unlocking something in them.
Yes.
Like you have to be vulnerable
Yeah.
in order for them to share their story, their need. I found this to be true amongst young generational communication, intergenerational. So I'm an old guy now. And especially when we're talking about teenagers or young adults, I'm now 59 year business years old, right? And so, but I can tell you when I share something personal and vulnerable, it is a pathway, it's like an open door, a bridge between me and someone else. And your story is powerful. I think that the more people are willing to share their story, whether you're a young adult leader or you're just a believer, you know, sharing your story is an open door. You don't have to be perfect.
Right.
Like, are you guys perfect in your relationships? No, I didn't think so.
And that's why they appreciate transparency. And so I think when a leader or person can get up and not like share all the nitty gritty, but focus like 20% on of who I once was, but 80% on like what God has done for me, and He can do the same for you. Like, I'm nothing special. We're all on equal playing ground. Claiming to be a Christian and a follower, even if you're listening, like there is healing and redemption in the process of discovering what God has for you. It's whether or not we're willing to look in the mirror, surrender, and recognize like, oh, apart from Him, we can do nothing, but He can use my story. Like, look at anybody in the Bible. Look at where Jesus come from. You know, like a messy tree of family. We all come from an ugly background. It's a matter of what we're going to do with the cards that have been dealt to us for the story that God is writing, and who's going to hold the pen or who's going to sit in the driver's seat. So I think when you can get up from stage and share your heart with young adults, like they're gonna lean in and be like, oh, I'm not alone. Nobody talks about this, you know? And when you bring yourself, you know, in on them or bring them in on the story, they're all yours. And if you can just pray for them and bless them, the guard just goes down and they're all weeping, they're all crying, they're all like raising their hands. What about, and it's like, oh, how much time do we have? Because I could sit here all day.
Because there is so much hope.
Yes.
If we can get to that.
Yes.
We got to get past the barriers of everybody's got to be perfect.
Yeah.
There are no perfect people allowed in the kingdom of God.
That's right.
You know, what did Paul say? I'm the worst of sinners. How does he say it? I mean, he wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. He's able to say that. But it's true when we are able to recognize that it's all even at the foot of the cross. It's the grace of Jesus that brings and lifts us up. And there's hope for anyone in any circumstance, no matter your family background, your mess ups, things that you screwed up in relationships, that's not over. It's just time to turn the chapter into a new chapter. That's good. Now, as you look at young adults today, what's the next 12 months look like? What do you guys see around the corner? Give us a peek.
Oh my gosh. I think we hold it all loosely. And that's been, you know, I'm a planner. I love having a plan. But at the same time, it's like we might have a good idea for the next few weeks or even 6 months. But beyond that, like we hold it all loosely. We really don't know. I think some of the things that we're really passionate about is seeing young adults reach for Christ, looking churches to start young adult ministries to strengthen an existing one. I think just discipling on a one-on-one basis, meeting with new believers for me, like that's very much in our wheelhouse. Like picking a Monday, going to mug shots or coffee shop, and just sitting with people, asking them questions, praying together. But I think beyond that, like this next year, our theme is really equip the saints. And whether you're an 18-year-old, a 30-year-old, a leader of somebody 18 to 30, or just listening because you're passionate about the next generation, like we want you to be equipped to do the work of the ministry, doing ministry through people, not to people. And I think that specifically, man, like we're training up coaching communities for leaders. It really does. It's inspiring.
I love it.
Pastor Nate, you had in your, I think it was your master's degree. Project was like on mentoring and reverse mentorship, and even the community of
Peer
learning.
mentoring.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so that young adult ministry is such a new attempt for a lot of people that you could be at a great church and feel isolated. So that's something that's launching this fall. I think that we're excited about even next month, July. This is going to air in June, but July, West Coast Conference, Southern California, Mariners Church. So if you're nearby in that area, we'd love to just introduce you to a great community of young adult ministry.
Spread the
leaders.
word.
Yes.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah. What I'm looking forward to.
I think it's just connecting people even more locally that we kind of do on a local level, as we want to see all the people feel like they have support, like not only from the lead pastor or the ministry that they're working with, but to know that we're offering friendship, we're offering relationship, we're offering, whether it's, setting up the cohort type things, but really helping others pray and prep for their futures. Because we realize even having 60 young adults come to the conference in March for leaders, most of them were not even in the role for 2 years. So 2 months to 2 years, they're kind of all in that infant stage of like, Josiah says, it's a new attempt, but we want it to take root in the hearts of the church and the hearts of the people, and not have this revolving door of like, oh, young adults was here for 3 years and now they're not coming back for another 30. Not the people, but the ministry itself. So how do we help people build something that's sustainable, that aligns with the vision of the pastor that they're serving under, that can, not
That would be a
silo,
great
but,
podcast into itself. Like I got 50 questions to ask you about that as a lead pastor. Because one of the things about the stage of the adult ministry is it's kind of transitional.
Exactly.
So people come in, they're in it for a certain amount of time, and then they move on. They don't stay in the young adults stage. Maybe they get married, they have kids, and they kind of move into another part of the church and ministry wise. But meanwhile, we need people who are called to still be there and stay for each cohort that comes through, each group that comes through. So you should put that in your podcast repertoire for a whole episode. For senior pastor, lead pastor types, even for
This question
churches.
comes from Pastor just so you know.
Yes, it's coming at you strong. I love it.
It's good.
I mean, a quick comment on that. I mean, we met with a young individual fired up, and I think for us, just calling it the way it is, he is Gen Z. Nobody's going to reach Generation Z like somebody in the generation. But I just said, look, you need to unpack your bags and stay a while. Because if you're wanting to reach a group of people who are transitional, like you've got to be a bedrock of consistency. You've got to make a commitment to, as long as God will have you there. And it is hard, but I think even you talked about, I remember being young and finding other young leaders, but it wasn't until I looked to people a little bit further than me. So we found a good rhythm of, okay, leader is whoever, but equipping 25 to 30-year-olds to be the small group leaders for the 18 and 25. Because then right then and there, you have people who might have a mortgage, they might have a little bit more of a career job, and they're a little bit less likely to move to Portland in 6 weeks. So there's just a little bit more health and
stability.
Yeah.
A parallel to that, I remember back in the day, way back in the day when I was a youth pastor, I had about 120 adult volunteers and about 70 of them college age.
Wow.
So what I loved about college age students is they were willing to give their time. And there was a little bit of community on the leadership team where they liked each other too. So they already had fun together while they administered to the next generation. But what I discovered, the danger zone, or one of the weaknesses of it, was if students, high school and middle school students, were following these young adults who are still wondering if they're going to get married, wondering where they're going to go with their life, living on a roller coaster of their own. Guess who they were leading? They're leading these young kids, and the kids are going up and down with them. And so I actually recruited stable, older, boring adults. Boring. but faithful people who
Yeah.
knew who they were, weren't wondering what they were gonna be down the road. And I kind of planted them right alongside those college students.
Yeah.
And it stabilized the whole thing.
Mhm.
And good balance came into the force, so to
Good.
speak.
Yes.
And I think that's wisdom, really do. So 1 year is one shot. What do you think about 10 years?
I think, well, 10 years, we can have our dreams, but like Josiah said, we just want to hold everything loosely when it comes to ministry, because we're not guaranteed tomorrow as individuals, let alone the ministry. So just really recognizing and realizing that everything needs to be birthed in prayer and everything needs to be covered in prayer. And we began, essentially, anything we start, we begin with an end in mind.
Mm.
Like our marriage, where do we want to be at the end of our life, or end of our marriage? What does retirement look like?
Mm.
What does occupations look like? What does house look like? What does children look like? I think when you're in ministry, even like young adults today, it's like, hey, how do we build something that's going to outlive and outlast us?
Yeah.
And if it's not even just the name, but it's the people, it's the culture, it's learning how to live and leave a legacy that's has a kingdom imprint and the handprint of God, not Micah and Josiah. We were just the servants that stewarded the vision, the dream that God was birthing inside of us. So I think with that, it's learning how to take people along and have off ramps and on ramps for people, whether it's future staff, whether it's future interns, whether it's future mission trips for our supporters that can go over to Israel, whatever those are. Those are some dreams that we have kind of logistically behind the scene, like, God, this isn't ours, this is yours. So what does that mean and what does that look like? But to have systems and structures in place that are going to lead some people to their goal and to their destiny that God's burdened their heart with, while unleashing their potential in the process, versus, being so stuck in the mud that they're just trudging through ministry or trudging through life, whether it's young adult in the marketplace or it's somebody, who's leading a ministry. It's like, wow, like the wild adventure that we get called on each and every single day is a knock on our door from the Lord, and it's whether or not we're getting invited into the process. So those are just some of the things that come to my mind. But Josiah, I'm sure you have a couple.
I like holding it
Ideas.
all loosely, but the practical side is right now, young adults are Gen Z.
Yeah.
10 years from now, the cusp of the alpha generation will hit college campuses.
Yeah.
So these people are already living,
Yeah.
but they're going to need to grow and own their own faith.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's really understanding that, knowing that, like you said, leaving a legacy that outlives and outlasts us. One practical thing is, I think so much of what we're doing, why it exists, is that song telling the next generation about the mighty acts of God, and then looking up and not seeing it, or not seeing resources that I needed when I was a young adult pastor, that she needed leading the young adult ministry. So, I mean, one practical thing we just launched, Equip the Saints, doesn't have our name on it anywhere. It's a collaborative resource with 10 other contributors. But I just think, man, over the next 10 years, what if there was an updated library so you don't need to read something from 06?
Right.
Nothing against 06. but
06.
What if it was like, hey,
Yeah.
how can we help you
Yeah.
to have the resources that
Yeah.
you need to build relationships that can last a lifetime, and to have rally points that can build for the future as well.
That's really good. Jesus spent 3 years to prepare his disciples for a lifetime. So he wasn't even around now. He left them in the hands of the Holy Spirit, who's pretty good, right? But he was thinking about that legacy thinking that you're talking. When you talked about the 3 kids that you have, one of them being a podcast.
Yeah.
But when you think about what you're preparing your kids for in their future, you think that way with ministry, with life. The next 10 years could outlive you, but those generations, should Jesus tarry, are going to keep being raised up. So we got to pray for God to raise up more leaders, right? And more and more and more who receive the baton,
Yes.
are ready to run with it.
Yep.
In every city, in every church, in every
Yes.
place, because if they begin to, then they can hand the baton off.
Yep.
So you guys are inspiring people, but you aren't replacing their ministry.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
just here to help inspire.
Yeah.
Well, and we were driving up here dreaming about the 10-year and okay. And I just had this thought right now. I know about 3 states or districts that have an appointed leader for young adults.
Yeah.
They have somebody doing some events and resourcing churches. And I just thought, man, what if in 10 years, what if every state or every district had like the young adult weekend. What
Yeah.
if there was a retreat in every
Yeah.
state that isn't led by us,
Yeah.
but it's just from asking the question, from ringing the bell, from equipping?
Yeah.
I
That's
think
really
that
good.
would be like, man, some of the tangible.
Becomes a
types
part of
things.
the continual culture of
Yeah.
each area or ministry. And that's not just one denomination, that could be any.
Right.
I think that's so good. You know, I just completed my 10th year at Emmanuel. So this question about what happens over the next 10, I'm on the other side of that. Meaning I've been reflecting, I started 10 years ago. Mark Batterson has a statement that he says, we often overestimate what we can do 1 year, but we underestimate what God can do in 10.
Right.
And so the
Powerful.
reality is if we lean into it, something powerful can happen. In my case, I look back and go, wow, look what God has done.
Right.
And to God be the glory. But I thought I could do it all in 1 year. And so I do play a part, but it's not all on my shoulders. And if I'm putting those things in the Lord's hands and I get the how out of here, meaning he determines the how sometimes.
Right.
It isn't what we anticipated. It isn't how we anticipated it. But if we lean in and we say, God, you have a greater love for young adults than I do.
Right. Yep.
Your passion is so much greater than mine. So help me do my part, but let your kingdom come. Let your
That's
will be
right.
done on
That's
earth
right.
as it is in heaven. You know, when it comes to young adults that might be listening, they might be thinking, you guys are talking about legacy and organization stuff. Right now, I'm in a place of despair. I don't even have hopes for myself. What would you say to someone like that, that they're hearing about this and maybe they know that intellectually they have big dreams for their life, but they're currently in a place where they just need some hope? What would you guys say?
Sure. I mean, I just taught a little bit on one thing that everyone needs. It's relationships. And I think the things that matter most in life are the things that are going to last forever. And the things that have the potential to last forever is our relationship with God and our relationship with community, with other people. And so I would be this bold to say, don't go to the ATM.
That's good.
And this is what I mean. There was a entrepreneur. He was an innovator. His name, make sure I get it right. John Shepherd Barron in 1967 London was impatient, and he was waiting in line like we all do. And he thought of like, I could automate this. Genius idea.
Right.
And yet sociologists have had a heyday with it because it's one of like 100 mindless things that have all been automated. Pretty soon we're scanning out groceries that we don't even talk or have any human interaction. Could you imagine a world where you go to church online? Not against church online, way to reach people, but if you're home and you were like an online student, and then you get a job someday where you work remotely, the thing that we're wired for, like why does Harvard talk about the thing that's killing people is loneliness and isolation? And so we see it in Genesis, very towards the beginning of God's intent is that it's not good for us to be alone. So I would just say, don't go to the ATM. Like I have not been to the ATM ever. I don't have an ATM card or code. And it's just a little bit of a discipline to say, I want to go out of my way to build new friendships. People are not projects, they're potential friends. And it's that way in life. It's that way in leadership, and relationships, and ministry. But if you want to leave a legacy, I would look at the relationships question.
I would even say, just if you're listening, if you're discouraged, if you're leading a ministry, or maybe you're just trying to figure out life and you're a young adult listening, I would say the 3 things that I would encourage you to lean into are stop competing. Stop competing and comparing yourself to others where you want to be. And those people that are somewhere that you want to be, don't be jealous or envious of them. Ask them. They could be a potential mentor to speak into who you want to become or what's something that you really love about them. You want to grow in your prayer life. You want to grow in your business strategy. You want to grow in your ability to evangelize and share your testimony. You want to grow in your finances. Find somebody that you admire, not worship, admire, and know that they're doing it well. And ask if you can just come along for the ride and just ask for some form of mentorship. I think that in leadership, any form of leadership, which we're all leaders on some level, we begin to compete, compare, complain. And we start complaining about people. We're telling God that he didn't know what he was doing when he created us, or we're not fill in the blank. when we're complaining and doing that, it's not doing anybody any good. When we're competing, we're fighting over the microphone, who has a louder voice. That doesn't get anybody anywhere either. But we start championing, being a champion and championing each other on and saying like, Lord, help me to see my brothers and sisters in Christ like you see them, and help me to love them like I want to love them, right? And things will break off of you in that process. So I would just say when you start doing that, you begin to recognize and realize the power of two things. And I always get this image that was actually prophesied over me, and I was in a season of this where you're in a kayak and you have a paddle, and one paddle represents prayer and one represents doing. If you're only praying and you're frustrated, competing, comparing, complaining, whatever, and you're only praying or you're only focusing on that, what are you going to do in a kayak? You're going to spin in circles in one direction. If you're only doing and you're not listening to God, you're not praying, you're not seeking out wisdom, knowledge, counsel from anybody else around you, and you're doing, you're chasing the wind, you're chasing your tail, and you're not getting anywhere. But when you are in prayer and you begin to do what's exposed to you in prayer, or you do, and then God's speaking to you in your prayer life, you begin to propel forward in that kayak where you're not going on a crazy cycle to the left or the right. You begin to focus and narrow in on what God's called you to, the rapid before you, the next day, the next project, the next fill in the blank of what you're working on. And when you start propelling of praying and doing and praying and doing, that's when the adventure sets in, right? And that's when you recognize like, it's not the destination. The destination is being with Jesus, yes, but it's the journey along the way. When those white water rapids come, like I've been on those rafts. I've been in Alaska on 4s and 5s, and you're like, oh my gosh, are we going to survive this? We don't know. Like, are the bears going to get us, or is the tour guide with the gun going to get us? We don't know. But you know what? When you're praying and doing, and God's going to protect you in that process, you know. But when you start focusing on serving others, your heart changes. And I just heard something. If you feel discouraged and you don't feel supported, start supporting and cheering somebody else on, because something breaks inside of you that's not that negative attitude like you're talking about earlier, but you're focusing on the positive. Like, what do I have to thank God for? I'm going to go through my blessing list versus my blurbing list of ugliness. So that's just something that I think of. Maybe
I love that. So even what I hear out of it, because that spirit inspired in that preach. But what I hear is in the middle is, if you feel discouraged or stuck, lean into relationships. Don't stop. Keep going. Keep showing up. Don't pull away from church. Don't go, I'm just going to be an online person only. There's elements for that are good, but in large part, it's actually dangerous because you can't be discipled from the pulpit. You need to be in relationship with other people, and you can't be mentored just by reading somebody's book, although you get good ideas. I have distance mentors, but the mentors that really keep me going, I get the most from, we're across the table from, where we're working together, we're serving together. That's so good. In fact, you can pause and pray if you need to. That's just one of those, all right, I receive that even now. Let me shift gears a little bit. Ask just a question about how you do this thing financially for your family and in the ministry. How's the fundraising going? Because you guys have kind of leapt off a cliff and said, we believe that God is calling us to do this. How's it going?
It's going amazing. It would be one of the miracles is how there's been a parachute that we can do this. And it's been provided through God. And I get inspired by it. We have a little notebook or journal that it's just kind of those manna moments of daily bread, just enough. And like practically how we are able to fund this ministry. We're funded as missionaries to the next generation. And like on a monthly basis, our support is at 85%, which is awesome. I think the challenge is time, right? We have some meetings coming up, and we're working to get that to a place where it's fully funded. But we haven't wanted to neglect the ministry in the process or stop or come off the field, so to speak. But that's kind of a real-time update of where things are at. I'm really proud of how you guys approached this whole thing, because kind of went in as one mission and organization, and now it's kind of broadened and grown, and that required more faith to step out, and that means individuals and churches have said, hey, we're in. If somebody were wanting to jump in and they never have yet, but God is kind of prompting them to support young adults today, how would they do it? We'd love to meet. Like if you're watching or listening, we'd love to take time. You've probably heard some of the vision or the mission. And if you wanted to jump to that next step of visiting youngadultstoday, there's a donate button. The website, just youngadultstoday, and you can click on that. And our top need would be monthly support.
Okay.
And but I think that some people, like maybe they own a business or maybe they're just look at things more annually, like there's project needs of what we're doing as well.
Sure, we'll talk about it.
I think when I listen to it, what you're saying, and most of the time when people listen to a Christian nonprofit broadcast, they're pleading for money all the time. You guys don't do that.
Yeah.
And so because I'm interviewing you, I just want to give you an opportunity to say, yeah, and I believe in it. I believe in what God is doing through your ministry, and I'm so excited about the future. Any other practical things that we can do if a listener wants to participate or help the needs of young adults today?
Yeah, that's great. Well, first of all, thank you so much. You believe in us, and you've been in Josiah's corner for what is it, 12 years almost already? Holy cow. So we just appreciate anybody who wants to jump on. I mean, most people, if you're not in a place to give, you can definitely be a person of prayer, and you can get added to our monthly newsletter. So just direct message us and then give us your email address so we can give you the monthly updates. And that's just like what God's doing, where we're going to be, what needs that we have. And then we always want to pray for you. So anybody on our prayer list or our giving, we always pray for them as well. So we have a running list of dozens of people and families that are walking through deep things, but it's like, nobody's asking them. We're saying, hey, pray for us. But I'm like, no, we want to say we want to pray for you as well. So the prayer thing is definitely one. If God doesn't lay something on your heart, maybe it's not a monthly gift, but you're like, hey, we have some special events coming up, such as like the weekend every year, we have the leadership conference. If there's any form of you want to sponsor or send somebody our way, whether it's physically saying like, hey, I'll sponsor my whole team from my church. How do I do that? Or I'll sponsor 10 students, what is the cost of the camp for them? So even just the practicalities of someone's heart really like leads for, specifically a retreat type thing versus giving annually or whatever, that's always, or monthly, that's always something to lean into. And people have fun scholarshiping because you kind of have a name, a face. Was so-and-so's life radically transformed and changed? Because we do have a lot of grandparents that actually reach out and say, hey, can I sponsor my grandson or my granddaughter? If they come, can I take care of it for them? So there's a lot of fun ways to get involved. Josiah, you're thinking of something.
The only other thing, I was trying to think outside the box.
Oh,
and
yeah.
One of my favorite things right now, because it just happened, there's a gal who works for Target Corporation, does great work there. Her graphic designs are in all of our homes. But she's like, hey, if you ever need a book cover, if you need graphics, so there might be somebody with a skill set, and you're like, hey, I have more time. And there's people who are like, hey, I'm in a place to write checks or to get awesome. There's a place for that.
Yeah.
There's also like, we like to think creatively of, hey, how can we be creative to reach the next generation for Christ?
So that means anybody that's listening, it could be a lead pastor, it could be a young adult leader, it could be somebody just interested. They can reach out to you guys. You can provide resources that will help them too.
Yeah.
And in so doing, they become a part of Young Adults Today, right?
Exactly.
It's all of us together.
Yes.
That are in this part of the process. I love that. All right, now we go to the final
5 and 5.
5 and 5. And so how do you want me to do this? Do you want me to just ask you individually the same question, or do I say it and then you answer?
Yeah, we'll go rapid here. Right?
Fire.
We'll both answer each question, right?
30 seconds or less each.
Ooh, okay. We're
Here we go.
accepting our own challenge.
Uno. Here we go. Describe each other in 3 words.
Beautiful. #adventure and passionate.
Those are good. Okay, I would say Josiah is motivated, faithful, and I'd say adventurous as well.
Awesome.
Yep.
Number 2. What is one dream you have for your girls?
To Aurora and Avalon, I dream of them loving the Lord, loving each other, knowing that like we believe in them. And in a sense, this is all for them. That makes sense. Like their faith, the faith of their generation or even future generations, get fired up about that.
I would say that one of my prayers is that they would live up to the dreams and expectations that God has for them, not that we have for them. and that they would truly experience the goodness of God and the spiritual gifts and skill sets to come alive at a very young age, so they can't deny who he is and won't walk away
So good.
in the process.
So good. Number 3, what has God been teaching you in this season?
For me, simply, it's like I've always been good at being productive and I've always been disciplined, but priorities, I've just had a list and it's gotten done. And having young kids, being married, launching a new ministry, there hasn't always I have a to-do list that's yet to be done for the kind of the first time in my life. And I think God's just helped me take one day at a time, one step at a time, and not overlook people in the process, to not sacrifice or neglect relationships for the sake of tasks. That's what I'm learning real time.
Man, I'd say I am learning embrace the moments right in front of you, because I'm very futuristic and I'm always thinking where do I need to be next? What do I need to do? What do the girls need? So always future thinking and not wishing teething away or potty training away or the next event. And so let's get home, get on the plane and get ready for the next, but to embrace the moments that God has given us and not wish them away out of my own excitement. I don't even know.
But so for real, right there. It's
Next Sunday.
Yeah,
next
right.
event.
not all at once. Right?
Exactly.
All right. This is the next one's a little more personal, as if I'm personally asking you this on behalf of all the pastors everywhere. What is one thing you would like every lead pastor listening to this podcast to know about young adult ministry?
I think it doesn't need to be a program. It can be personal relationships, like a small group, a network of small groups. I think the pushback sometimes historically, maybe why young adult ministry hasn't happened, is the fear that it would be a siloed ministry or a church within a church. Or I think it can really start with personal relationships. And I think also that we don't want money to be a reason why we can't do something, whatever it is. And I would just pray that if God has a vision for you to reach the next generation, that he would provide every team member for the dream and he'd provide every resource. And I just think that it's been amazing to see how when you have a dream or you have, be ready for that ask. If you're a pastor, somebody says on the car ride home, how can I help? What can I give to? Knowing that, man, maybe a next generation discipleship strategy, it doesn't need to be a program, but I think just not being afraid of young adults either.
Yeah, that's good.
That's where I was going to start. Don't be afraid of young adults. I would say, in addition to that, don't be afraid to pass the baton. Because somebody passed the baton and the mantle to you as a lead pastor in some way, shape, or form, and lean into those people that are coming through, because what we're seeing is, statistically speaking, in the next 10 years, 50% of lead pastors will be retiring, which leaves this gaping hole of who do we raise up and who's trying to hold on for dear life because they don't want to pass whatever God's doing. It all belongs to God. So I would just say, don't be afraid of the young adults, create opportunities and room for them, and say it from the pulpit that you see them, they matter, and they're there for a reason. And if you have a young adult ministry, keep cultivating that and see what God does, not what we do as people and leaders, but what God does, because every single person that God brings before us is an opportunity to shepherd a sheep. And if they're not getting fed in a season that they need, which is detrimental to their spiritual well-being, those 12 years, because they have a 96% chance of saying yes to Jesus before their 30th birthday, which means 4% after their 30th birthday, their mind has been so solidified and cemented of their world culture, faith views, and everything else. Take those 12 years and just see what God does. I mean, even if it's you as a pastor taking a risk, when's the last time you took a risk on a young adult?
Yeah, that's so good.
I don't know.
So good. You started stepping into the whole succession talk. Of course, that's what I did my dissertation on. So
Can we read that?
Passing the baton. And one of the things I would just add into that is that succession is not handing off an inanimate object. It's not a pastor just handing a job to another person. Yeah. It is thousands of relationships.
Oh, 100%.
You know what I mean?
100%.
It's taking care of people and sharing relationships. Yeah. And new pastors can do that.
Yeah.
All right. So 5 and 5, number 5.
Here we go.
All right, here we go. How can we, the audience, join you in prayer in the coming season?
I'd say pray for Micah and I, our marriage, our daughters. Their names are Aurora and Avalon. And pray for the faith of the next generation. Let's stand in the gap.
Good.
Yeah, I would say, gosh, for us specifically, oh my goodness, I would say obviously us, the next generation, but I'd even say like, I would challenge you, how are you praying for yourself and how do you see young adults? Like ask that God would teach you how to love and see people in a way that burdens your heart for what you might be called to, even if it's not young adults. But when you do that, he will lay something on your heart that agitates your spirit or keeps you up or wakes you up at night. So in addition to what Josiah said.
That's good. It's really good.
Well, we wanted to close with one question to flip the script on you.
Okay.
Thank you for guest hosting.
Oh, this has been fun.
Thanks for believing in us, for believing in the next generation. But Pastor Nate, we'd love to ask every guest. We may have asked you before, but the spirit might just hit different or might just be a different answer, different day. But why do you believe that the faith of the next generation, discipling young adults, is so vital?
Well, I can tell you one reason is that Jesus cares about it. And he chose to invest in young adults in his discipleship team. And I mean, even recent movies highlight moves of God amongst young generations, Jesus Revolution, that kind of thing. It just shows the power of what could happen if we do invest in that next generation. And then whatever you do there goes with them for the rest of their life. Right? So if we can see God move there, then in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s, it carries with them, and their kids, and their grandkids inherit it. Then cities, communities, and families have an opportunity to inherit the kingdom of God in their life. And so that's why I think it's so vital. And I think that we just have to keep our hands to the plow, as the scripture said. We need to lean in and remember that our time to do that is never over.
It's good.
So good. Well, thanks for joining us today and for guest hosting. We don't just hand anybody the reins, but for you, this is incredible. A dream come true to record this with you.
Thanks.
Thanks for your leadership, Emmanuel, and just being for being a shepherd-hearted leader.
Well, it's so great, and a dream come true for me too, and very natural. So we can hang out. We probably talk just like this when you guys come and meet with me in this place anyway.
Yep.
The only thing we didn't do is go to the board while we were
Sure
talking.
so
there you go. All right.
Until next time, this is the Young Adults Today podcast.